In a losing war, the alien princess stepped forward and defied fate. Her world, once vibrant with forests that glowed under twin suns, and oceans that shimmered with colors no human eye could imagine, was now scarred and silent. Cities she had walked through as a child lay in ruins, and the echoes of her people's songs were replaced by the cold hum of abandoned war machines. The coalition's fleets had been shattered, their allies gone, and enemy ships now moved like dark predators around her home system. The alien princess, sole heir of a proud and ancient lineage, looked at the stars with a mix of despair and determination. Despite the crushing losses, she refused to let fear rule her. In the council hall, high above the wrecked city, she stood before the assembly of leaders. Every eye in the room, weary and desperate, was fixed on her. The High Council, composed of the oldest and most cautious members of her species, had already made their decision. They had prepared the surrender protocols. They had already written letters that would beg mercy from the enemy. Every voice around her pleaded for retreat. Every argument was layered with logic and despair. They spoke of lost fleets, scorched planets, and the inevitable end. The princess listened carefully. She did not interrupt, but her mind raced faster than any of them could imagine. She thought of her people, her home, and the legacy of her ancestors who had ruled with courage and wisdom. Surrender would save lives, yes, but it would also hand over their dignity, their culture, and the memory of their sacrifices. She had seen history repeat itself countless times. Empires fall, worlds bow, and entire species vanish quietly into the darkness. She would not allow her people to be one of them. Finally, she rose, her tall figure casting a long shadow across the room. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had made a decision that could cost everything. "We will not flee," she said. The words were simple, yet they carried a defiance that made even the oldest council members pause. A tense silence followed. The air seemed to vibrate with disbelief. Some whispered that she had lost her mind. Others wondered if she had finally accepted the hopelessness and was speaking nonsense. The princess met their eyes, one by one. "I know the numbers. I know our fleets are broken. I know our worlds burn and our allies are gone, but I will not surrender to fear. We will find a way to turn this war, even if it is the last thing we do. There is a path still open, a choice they do not expect." A murmur spread through the council. Some dared to ask, "And what is this path, Your Highness? What hope do we have left?" She took a deep breath. "We will seek humans." The hall went completely silent. Humans, the species that had once been dismissed as weak and unpredictable. The ones who had vanished from the galaxy decades ago, leaving behind rumors of strange, independent worlds and strange strategies no one understood. The mention of them felt like naming a ghost. The council members' faces changed from doubt to outright shock. "Humans," one of the elders whispered. They abandoned the galaxy. They refuse to bow to anyone. They are gone." The princess shook her head. "No, they are not gone. I have studied their history. I have read every record, every log, every fragment of information about them. They do not bow. They do not surrender. They survive. And when survival is their cause, nothing stops them. I will go to them and I will ask for their aid." Arguments erupted. They told her it was madness. They reminded her that no one knew where the humans were, that they had no obligations to anyone, that asking them for help was a gamble that could destroy the remnants of her people. But the princess remained unmoved. "Do you prefer surrender?" she asked quietly. "Do you prefer to hand our fate to the enemy? Do you prefer that our children grow up knowing only defeat and fear? I would rather gamble on life than accept death as if it were inevitable." After long hours of debate, the council, beaten and fearful, finally yielded to her will. There was no cheering, no applause, only resigned nods and the quiet acceptance that this princess, their last hope, would act in defiance of all reason. She left the hall, her mind already planning the journey that could decide the future of her people. Her fleet, What remained of it was small and battered. Ships with hulls scarred from battle floated silently in the orbital docks. Engineers and pilots worked tirelessly to patch engines, repair shields, and refit weapons. It was a fleet built not for glory but for survival, and into this fleet she poured all her hope. She called her closest advisors to her side. "We will jump toward the human worlds," she told them. "We do not know what we will find, but we will not return without allies. Prepare the ships for long-distance travel. Prepare the crews for anything. Our future depends on the unknown." Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They had grown used to her bravery, but even they had never seen her so willing to take such a risk. "The humans are unpredictable," one of them said. "We know little, almost nothing. What if they refuse?" The princess met the gaze of her advisor with unwavering resolve. "Then we survive on our own, and we will make the galaxy regret underestimating us. We have lost battles, yes, but we are not yet defeated. Humanity does not follow rules we understand, and that is exactly why they may help us. They will recognize the stakes as we do and act. That is all the hope we need." As preparations continued, the princess walked through her city one last time. She moved past shattered towers and crumbling streets, past statues that had once celebrated victories long gone. She saw the children hiding in the shadows of buildings, their eyes wide with fear. She saw the elders huddled together, whispering prayers for safety. And she felt the weight of every life in her species on her shoulders. Yet she did not falter. Instead, she felt a spark of determination grow stronger. This was not just about survival. This was about showing her people that even in the darkest hour, courage and action mattered more than fear. She would lead, even when all seemed lost. The day of departure came. The fleet, though small, gleamed under the light of the twin suns. The princess boarded the lead ship, her hand resting on the railing, staring at the stars. Every pilot and crew member looked at her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They were tired, scarred, and beaten, yet they trusted her, and trust, she knew, was stronger than any weapon. As the jump coordinates were set, she gave the final command. "Prepare for jump. We go not because victory is certain, but because survival demands action. Hold your courage, hold your will. We are not finished yet." The engines roared and the stars stretched into lines of light as the fleet leaped into the unknown. The princess stood firm, watching the familiar stars fade behind her. The future was uncertain. The humans could reject her plea. The journey could be dangerous. She might never return. But she felt no fear. Not because she was reckless, but because she understood that sometimes hope itself was the only weapon left against despair. For days, the fleet traveled through empty space, passing systems abandoned by war, drifting past planets that had fallen silent. Communications were sparse, and every unknown signal was treated as a potential threat. Supplies were low, engines strained, and morale wavered. Yet the princess moved among her people, speaking quietly, encouraging pilots, comforting engineers, and reminding everyone that their lives were not yet forfeit. She carried herself not as a princess waiting for salvation, but as a commander who would fight until the last breath. Then, on the seventh day, a signal appeared on the long-range scanners. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Human. The fleet trembled, hope flaring suddenly after so many days of fear. The princess ordered immediate response. As the signal grew stronger, shapes appeared on the sensors. Ships of strange design, unknown technology, and disciplined formation. Not elegant, but resilient. Not fast, but purposeful. Humanity had not vanished. They were alive, watching, waiting, and judging whether these desperate aliens deserved their attention. The princess knew the true challenge had just begun. She had crossed the edge of despair, but now she had to convince a species who did not bow to anyone to join her cause. It would not be easy. Diplomacy would be fraught with tension. Any misstep could mean total annihilation. But the first step had been taken. The choice to act against the inevitable had already rewritten a small part of history. For the first time in weeks, the princess allowed herself a moment to breathe. She thought of her people, her home, and the future. She felt the quiet thrill of defiance. The war had not yet ended. The enemy believed victory was theirs, but hope, stubborn and alive, had found a way. And it began with a single, defiant step toward humanity, toward the unknown, toward survival against all odds. As the lead human ship came closer, the princess tightened her grip on the railing, her eyes fixed on the approaching fleet. She whispered to herself, not as a ruler, but as someone who would not let history forget her people. We will not die quietly. We will not surrender to fate. And no matter what comes next, we will fight and we will endure. The stars ahead seemed brighter now, not with the light of suns, but with the glimmer of possibility. And in that light the princess felt, perhaps for the first time in weeks, a sense of purpose beyond fear, beyond despair. She was no longer just a princess. She was a symbol, a leader. And the galaxy, as unpredictable as it was, might just witness something it had never seen before, a species refusing to bow, and a princess who dared to step forward when all others would run. The human fleet hovered silently in the void, a strange congregation of ships unlike anything the princess had ever seen. They were not the sleek, organized vessels of the coalition or the enemy empires. Their shapes were odd, angular, and functional, each vessel bearing signs of long use and careful repair. But despite their rough edges, the fleet exuded strength. It was a strength that did not shout. It did not boast. It waited, patient and calculated, as if it had seen centuries of war and had learned that victory was not about grand gestures but endurance and precision. The princess stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the distant forms grow larger on the sensors. She could feel the tension among her crew, a mixture of hope, fear, and disbelief. Many of them had never imagined humanity still existed, let alone that humans might answer a plea for help. The fleet had traveled far, risking every ship and crew, relying only on the whispered legends of a species that had once shaped the galaxy in ways no one could fully remember. Now, face to face with reality, the princess realized that hope could be fragile. One wrong move, one misjudged signal, and all their efforts could end in disaster. She sent a message, carefully composed in the universal language used for interstellar diplomacy, and transmitted it to the nearest human vessel. Her words were deliberate, humble, but clear. She introduced herself, explained the desperate state of her people, and outlined the threat posed by the enemy. Most importantly, she asked for help. She made no demands. She did not offer flattery. She simply told the truth. They were on the edge of annihilation, and she had come because survival demanded it. There was a long silence before any reply. Days passed in which her fleet moved cautiously, staying within a safe distance but close enough to maintain communication. The human ships remained mostly still, their crews working in a calm, methodical way. The princess grew restless, pacing the bridge, studying their signals, wondering if she had misjudged them. She thought of her people back home, of the soldiers and civilians alike who counted on her to succeed where all else had failed. Every heartbeat seemed magnified in the quiet of the void, every small blip on the sensors carrying the weight of fate. Finally, a response came. It was not immediate, not urgent, and it carried no overt emotion. It was a simple message, asking for a meeting. The humans had chosen to engage, but on their terms. The princess and her closest advisors quickly convened to plan the encounter. The meeting would take place at a neutral point, a small, uninhabited system where neither fleet would have an advantage. It was a gesture that conveyed caution and intelligence. Humans were willing to listen, but they trusted no one blindly. As the fleet approached the rendezvous, the princess spent time with her crew. She spoke quietly to them about courage, about the importance of trust, about why their survival depended not just on weapons but on the ability to act with clarity and patience. Some of the younger officers were anxious, unused to the strange rhythms of diplomacy, while the veterans had learned that fear often clouded judgment. The princess understood both. She reminded them that even in the darkest hour, a single decision could shift the course of events. It was their time to act wisely. When the two fleets finally faced each other, the humans revealed more than their ships. Small, unmanned probes drifted toward the alien fleet, scanning, measuring, and assessing. They moved with precision, collecting data without aggression. The princess watched with fascination. Humans did not rush. They did not show unnecessary force. They relied on knowledge and careful observation. It was a different kind of power, subtle, deliberate, and difficult to oppose. She realized that this was part of why they had survived when so many empires had fallen. Humans did not rely on size, nor on sheer firepower. They relied on understanding, strategy, and endurance. The first human envoy boarded her flagship. They were unarmed, moving with confidence that came not from arrogance but from certainty in their purpose. The princess greeted them with courtesy, observing their behavior closely. Humans were taller and more robust than she had imagined, with expressions that were direct and unflinching. They asked questions, not for protocol or ritual, but to truly understand. They did not seek to dominate. They did not demand submission. Their interest was practical, focused on information, on assessing the situation, and on determining whether an alliance made sense. The princess explained everything: the loss of fleets, the destruction of cities, the despair that had gripped her people. She spoke of the enemy, of the fleets that now surrounded her home system, and of the urgency that drove her to reach out. She did not exaggerate. She did not dramatize. She presented facts, and she did so with conviction, showing that even in defeat, she had not lost hope. Humans listened carefully, nodding, asking clarifying questions, and occasionally interjecting with observations that demonstrated their intelligence and experience. After hours of discussion, the humans did not offer immediate help. Instead, they proposed a plan. First, they would observe the enemy movements. They would gather intelligence on every fleet, every supply line, and every weakness. Then, if the situation warranted it, they would intervene, but only in ways that increased the chance of survival for both sides. The princess understood the implication. Humans did not act recklessly. They did not commit to battles they could not control. They measured, they waited, and then they acted decisively. It was both frustrating and inspiring. Over the following weeks, the princess fleet worked alongside the human observers. The humans shared insights about enemy behavior, pointing out patterns, weaknesses, and errors that even experienced alien officers had missed. They showed ways to evade ambushes, ways to repair damaged ships efficiently, and methods to protect civilian populations. Slowly, a sense of confidence began to grow among the princess crews. They were still outnumbered and outgunned, but they were no longer alone. And humans, even in their quiet, analytical way, brought a kind of hope that no one else had offered. One evening, while the fleets hovered near a neutral asteroid belt, the princess walked along the observation deck, watching the stars flicker in the distance. She thought about the humans she had met, their calm determination, and their refusal to bow to fear. She wondered why they had survived where so many others had failed. Then she realized the truth. Humans were unpredictable because they were adaptable. They did not rely on rigid rules or honor alone. They relied on creativity, courage, and the willingness to endure beyond limits. That combination had allowed them to outlast every threat the galaxy had thrown at them. The princess also noticed how her own people were changing. For the first time in weeks, soldiers laughed, worked together without despair, and discussed strategies with renewed energy. Civilians felt safer knowing that help, however cautious, was at hand. Even the older council members, once filled with doubt, now began to see possibilities. The princess had not just brought hope to her fleet, she had reminded them that action, even in desperate circumstances, could create opportunities. A sudden alert interrupted her thoughts. Scouts reported an enemy advance, moving faster than expected toward her home system. The humans studied the data, analyzing, predicting, and suggesting evasive maneuvers. The princess followed their instructions, carefully coordinating her fleet with theirs. It was not a straightforward battle. The humans taught her people to strike in unconventional ways, cutting supply lines, creating false signals, and retreating strategically to force the enemy into errors. The alien soldiers, initially skeptical, quickly adapted. They realized that survival required learning from humans as much as fighting alongside them. Days turned into nights, or what passed for nights in the artificial time cycles aboard the ships. The enemy pressed forward, confident and brutal. But the princess fleet, guided by human insight, became increasingly difficult to predict and even harder to destroy. Each small success, each avoided disaster fueled morale. The princess observed quietly from her command station, her face calm but her mind alive with calculation. She felt a strange satisfaction, not from power, but from witnessing resilience. Her people were beginning to understand what she had always known. Victory was not just about winning battles. It was about enduring, adapting, and refusing to surrender to despair. One day, during a particularly tense encounter near a hostile system, a human commander approached the princess. "You have courage," the human said simply. "But courage alone is not enough. You must act with patience, with observation, and with precision. If you can combine those with what your people already have, you may yet survive." The princess nodded, understanding the lesson. Her people were brave, yes, but bravery without strategy had cost them much already. Now, with humans guiding and teaching, they could turn the tide of the conflict, not by overwhelming force, but by intelligence, adaptability, and perseverance. She realized that this partnership, fragile though it was, might be the only way to save her world. As the fleets continued their slow, careful maneuvers, the princess allowed herself to imagine a future that had seemed impossible. A future where her people, battered and broken though they were, could survive. A future where humanity, long thought distant and indifferent, could prove to be a force of survival rather than destruction. And she began to understand something deeper. Sometimes, victory was not measured by the size of fleets or the power of weapons, but by the ability to inspire hope and resilience in others. The human ships remained close, their crews silent observers most of the time, yet always ready to act. The princess realized that she had underestimated them before, not because they lacked strength, but because their strength was quiet, patient, and methodical. They had survived because they refused to act impulsively. They had survived because they valued knowledge over pride. And now, in the most desperate hour of her people's existence, they were teaching her the same lesson. At night, when the stars stretched endlessly across the observation windows, the princess reflected on her choice to seek humans. She could have fled, could have accepted surrender like so many others would have demanded. But she had stepped forward, risking everything on the unknown, and now she saw the first signs that courage could create possibility. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of something more than hope. She felt purpose. And in that quiet space among the cold stars, she made a promise to herself and to her people. They would endure, they would adapt, they would survive. And when the enemy believed them defeated, they would show that even in the darkest hour, action, courage, and unity could rewrite fate. The human commanders, watching her quietly from their own ships, seemed to recognize something similar. They did not speak much, did not offer praise, and yet their presence was a statement of trust and acknowledgement. They were ready to observe, to teach, and perhaps, eventually, to fight alongside her. For the alien princess, it was enough. They had taken the first step, and now her people had a path forward, however narrow and uncertain. The war was not over. The enemy continued to advance. The future remained unpredictable, filled with danger and challenge. Yet for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the princess knew that she was not alone. Humanity had arrived, quiet and watchful, offering wisdom and partnership instead of empty promises. And in that alliance, fragile though it was, she saw a glimmer of possibility, a chance to defy fate itself. The enemy continued to advance relentlessly, confident in the superiority of their numbers and technology. Every day, their fleets moved closer to the princess, home system, leaving destruction in their wake. Planets that had once been vibrant were reduced to barren wastelands. Entire colonies vanished under precise bombardments. Yet, despite the looming threat, the princess' fleet had begun to transform. The humans' presence was more than reassurance. It was a lesson, a blueprint for survival and resistance that challenged everything her people had known. The princess walked along the bridge, observing her officers coordinate maneuvers with newfound skill. They spoke in rapid sequences of coordinates, tactics, and contingency plans. The humans had introduced strategies that seemed unconventional, even risky at first, but the results were undeniable. Small, fast strike groups cut enemy supply lines, forcing larger fleets to slow down or change course. Decoy transmissions lured enemy ships into traps where ambushes could be staged. Every day brought small victories, enough to lift morale, but never so large as to invite complacency. "What do you see, Your Highness?" asked one of her trusted advisors, a veteran pilot whose face bore the marks of countless battles. The princess did not answer immediately. She studied the enemy movements, watched the human coordination, and felt the patterns begin to emerge. "I see that they are not invincible," she said finally. "I see that their confidence blinds them to mistakes, and that is where we will find our strength. We are outnumbered, yes, but not outsmarted. If we act with patience and precision, we can turn their certainty into weakness." Her words carried weight because she spoke from experience. Her people had suffered devastating losses, yet they remained alive, intact enough to fight another day. The humans had brought calm and strategy to their despair. Together, the combined fleet moved like a single organism, responding to threats and exploiting openings with speed and intelligence. The princess realized that this was the essence of human power, not raw force, but the ability to endure, adapt, and strike at the most opportune moment. The first major engagement occurred near a cluster of uninhabited asteroid fields. Enemy scouts had detected the fleet's presence and launched a probing attack. The princess' officers braced for a direct clash, expecting overwhelming force, but the humans had prepared differently. Instead of a frontal assault, they split her fleet into smaller, coordinated groups that moved unpredictably through the asteroid fields. Missiles and energy weapons arced through space, striking enemy ships from unexpected angles. The enemy responded with aggression, but every attack was anticipated and countered. From the command deck, the princess watched the battle unfold with measured intensity. Her heart raced, yet she remained composed. Each successful strike, each enemy ship disabled or forced to retreat, brought a surge of hope to her fleet. The humans, despite their calm exterior, displayed remarkable creativity. They coordinated attacks that appeared chaotic but were meticulously planned, exploiting the enemy's rigid formations and predictable tactics. It was a revelation to her people. Strategy, patience, and adaptability could compensate for inferior numbers. After the engagement, the princess convened with the human commanders. They discussed what had worked and what needed adjustment. Humans spoke plainly, without arrogance, emphasizing observation and iterative improvement. Every encounter, they said, was a learning opportunity. They did not claim infallibility. They acknowledged errors openly and used them to refine their methods. The princess realized that this was why humans had survived for centuries. They were never complacent, never satisfied with previous success, and always prepared to adapt. As the weeks passed, the fleet became more confident. Civilian transports and refugee ships, once vulnerable, were now escorted with precision, using human-devised strategies to avoid enemy detection. Engineers repaired and retrofitted damaged vessels with efficiency that amazed the princess. The alien soldiers, initially skeptical of human methods, now embraced them, understanding that survival required flexibility and intellect, not just brute force. One day, a scout reported unusual movement near the outer rim of the system. Enemy forces were massing, preparing for what appeared to be a decisive strike against the princess' homeworld. Panic rippled through her fleet, but she remained calm. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the culmination of weeks of observation, adaptation, and coordination. The humans outlined a plan. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, they would lure them into a series of traps designed to stretch their forces thin. Decoy fleets would draw part of the enemy into asteroid fields, where ambushes awaited. Strike teams would disable key vessels and communications arrays, forcing confusion and hesitation. The princess fleet would act as the anchor, defending essential systems while the humans orchestrated the broader strategy. Execution required precise timing. Every ship, every crew, every movement had to be flawless. The princess coordinated with her officers, ensuring that each command was understood and executed with discipline. Fear lingered, but determination outweighed it. This was no longer just survival. It was an assertion of agency, a declaration that her people would not be destroyed quietly. When the enemy finally advanced, they encountered a battlefield unlike any they had anticipated. The asteroid fields, normally a neutral or even hazardous zone, had become a labyrinth of traps. Enemy ships were forced into narrow corridors, where ambushes from concealed vessels and automated defenses inflicted heavy losses. The human-led strike teams moved with deadly efficiency, cutting off retreat paths and disabling communications. Chaos spread among the enemy ranks, and confusion began to undermine their numerical advantage. From the command deck, the princess watched the enemy falter. Her people, inspired by the human strategy, fought with renewed vigor. They had seen what was possible when courage was combined with intelligence. Every maneuver, every calculated risk, reminded them that survival depended on action, not resignation. As the battle continued, the humans introduced another element: psychological warfare. Using recorded transmissions and decoy signals, they sowed doubt and hesitation among enemy commanders. The once confident fleet began to question orders, second-guess maneuvers, and hesitate at critical moments. It was subtle, invisible, yet devastatingly effective. The enemy's strength was no longer a guarantee; their cohesion was cracking. In the midst of this chaos, the princess led a squadron personally to defend a vital supply convoy. Her actions were not reckless. Every movement was calculated, every attack precise. She inspired her crews not by showing invulnerability, but by demonstrating courage combined with intelligence. They followed her example, acting decisively, striking at weaknesses, and adapting constantly to changing circumstances. The human commanders observed, approving her initiative while subtly guiding it to maximize effectiveness. By the end of the engagement, the enemy had suffered significant losses. Entire squadrons were destroyed or forced to retreat. Communications were disrupted, leaving the remaining fleets disoriented. The princess, homeworld though still under threat, was far safer than it had been weeks before. For the first time, her people felt that survival was not a distant hope but a tangible possibility. In the quiet that followed the battle, the princess convened a council with her closest advisors and the human commanders. They discussed lessons learned, weaknesses to shore up, and future strategies. The humans emphasized the importance of observation, patience, and adaptability. They reminded her that battles won were temporary. The true test would be endurance over time. The princess nodded, understanding that victory was not achieved in a single confrontation, but through sustained effort, intelligent risk-taking, and unwavering resolve. The princess also reflected on what she had witnessed among her people. Soldiers who had once been demoralized now moved with purpose. Engineers worked tirelessly, motivated by the knowledge that their skills directly influenced survival. Civilians felt a cautious optimism, understanding that the fleet's victories were small but meaningful steps toward security. Even the council members, once filled with doubt, began to recognize that hope and strategy could coexist with realism. One evening, as the fleet regrouped near a safe corridor, the princess walked along the observation deck. The stars stretched infinitely before her, but now they seemed less threatening. Each point of light reminded her of the lives at stake and the potential for triumph. She thought about humanity, about the quiet, calculated power they wielded, and about the lessons they had brought to her people. They had survived because they combined courage with intelligence, creativity with discipline, and endurance with flexibility. The princess realized that these qualities were what her people needed most. They had fought bravely before, but bravery alone had not been enough. Now, guided by humans and strengthened by experience, they were learning the same lesson. Survival depended on more than courage. It required adaptability, strategic thinking, and the willingness to endure beyond expected limits. As night fell over the fleet's temporary station, the princess reflected on the transformation that had taken place. Her people were no longer defeated, broken, or resigned. They were alive, alert, and learning. They had faced overwhelming odds and found new ways to fight, inspired by humans who refused to bow to fear. She knew that the war was far from over, that the enemy would return stronger and more determined. Yet she felt something she had not felt in weeks: confidence. Not arrogance, not certainty, but a quiet, firm belief that survival was within reach if they continued to act wisely and courageously. The next day brought news of another enemy movement, larger and more aggressive than before. The princess and her advisors studied the reports carefully. They would face a formidable challenge, but they were prepared. The humans had taught them to think differently, to anticipate rather than react, and to use every advantage the terrain, intelligence, and strategy could provide. The princess felt a surge of determination. This was the moment to prove that courage, intelligence, and endurance could overcome even the most daunting odds. As the fleet moved into position, the princess issued commands with calm authority. Strike teams were deployed to critical positions. Supply lines were reinforced. Observation posts were established to monitor enemy movements. Every crew member understood their role. Every officer knew their responsibility. The humans observed, guided, and advised, but the princess made the decisions. She had taken a step into the unknown, and now she was leading her people through it, demonstrating that leadership required both courage and wisdom. The enemy approached, unaware that they were entering a battlefield carefully prepared by those they underestimated. The princess fleet held its position, ready to act with precision and patience. The humans remained calm, their presence a steady reminder of what was possible when courage met intelligence. And in the hearts of her people, hope burned brighter than it had in months. The first salvos were fired, not blindly, but with purpose. Enemy ships were disabled before they could fully respond. Strike teams moved with exact timing, cutting off retreat paths and disrupting formations. The asteroid fields became a maze of traps, forcing the enemy into errors that magnified with each passing moment. The princess watched, directing, adjusting, and inspiring her crews. Every success, every calculated risk, reinforced the lesson that survival and victory were possible, even against overwhelming odds. By the end of the engagement, the enemy had suffered losses that would take weeks to recover from. The princess, homeworld, remained secure for now, and her people were stronger, wiser, and more confident than they had been when she first sought humanity's help. She understood that the war was far from over, but she also knew that they had achieved something remarkable, a demonstration of endurance, strategy, and courage that the enemy had not anticipated. In the quiet aftermath, the princess reflected on the journey so far. She had stepped forward when all seemed lost, reached out to a species that had been dismissed as distant and unpredictable, and found allies who taught her people to fight smarter, adapt faster, and endure longer. Humanity had become a mirror, showing her people the power of resilience, ingenuity, and unwavering determination. The war would continue. The enemy would regroup and strike again. But the princess knew that with patience, intelligence, and courage, her people could withstand even the greatest storms. They had learned to fight differently, to survive against the odds, and to believe that even in the darkest hour, defiance was possible. And as the stars stretched infinitely before her, the princess felt the quiet certainty that their story was far from over. The next chapter would test them even more, but for now, they had taken the first steps toward rewriting fate itself. The enemy had returned, larger and more determined than ever. Months of careful preparation and small victories had delayed their advance, but now their fleets moved like a dark storm, sweeping across the stars with devastating force. The princess stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the approaching armada. She felt the familiar weight of responsibility, but it was no longer paralyzing. Her people were ready. The humans were ready, and she had learned that courage and intelligence, when combined, could turn even the bleakest situation into a battlefield of possibility. Her fleet, though smaller than the enemy's, moved with precision. Strike teams positioned themselves in asteroid fields, near abandoned stations, and along hidden hyperspace corridors. Every vessel, every crew, and every weapon had a role. The humans had taught them to think beyond conventional tactics, to use patience and adaptability as weapons just as deadly as cannons or missiles. The princess felt a quiet pride as she observed her crews coordinating flawlessly, anticipating enemy movements before they occurred. The first engagement began at the edge of a contested system. Enemy scouts had detected unusual activity and moved to investigate, expecting an easy encounter. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a maze of decoys and ambushes. Strike teams disabled communication arrays, cut supply lines, and forced enemy ships into narrow channels where the asteroid fields became lethal. Explosions lit the void, but each one was part of a larger plan. The humans moved calmly, directing strikes, adjusting positions, and analyzing every enemy reaction. Their presence was like a steady hand guiding a nervous fleet, transforming fear into controlled action. From her observation deck, the princess watched as enemy commanders struggled to maintain cohesion. Panic spread through their ranks as ships were destroyed or disabled faster than they could respond. Their advantage in numbers seemed to vanish before her eyes. Every misstep, every hesitation, amplified the power of her smaller, more agile fleet. The princess realized that the humans had not just taught her people tactics, they had taught them confidence, the belief that they could survive against overwhelming odds. Midway through the engagement, the enemy launched a coordinated strike on her homeworld, hoping to break morale by threatening civilians and critical infrastructure. The princess acted immediately. She divided her fleet into multiple defensive groups, each tasked with intercepting enemy vessels while protecting the planets below. Strike teams executed maneuvers with astonishing precision, drawing enemy ships into traps designed to maximize damage while minimizing risk to civilians. The battle was intense, the stress unrelenting, but the combined fleet moved as one, each ship anticipating the other's actions. In the heat of the fight, the princess piloted a small squadron directly to defend a vulnerable planet. She did not act recklessly. Every movement was deliberate, every attack carefully calculated. Her crew followed her lead, inspired by her courage and her unwavering resolve. Missiles streaked through space, energy beams cut across enemy hulls, and the asteroid fields became a deadly advantage. The humans coordinated their efforts, ensuring that each maneuver, each strike was optimized for maximum effect. Hours passed and the enemy suffered heavy losses. Entire squadrons were destroyed, command ships disabled, and their advance slowed. The princess, homeworld, remained safe, a testament to the combined skill, courage, and endurance of her people and the humans who had joined them. Yet despite this success, she knew the war was not over. The enemy would regroup, stronger and more determined, and she could not afford complacency. As night fell over the fleet, the princess convened with her closest advisors and the human commanders. They reviewed the battle, analyzed mistakes, and adjusted strategies for the next engagement. The humans emphasized observation, adaptation, and patience, reminding her that endurance was as critical as bravery. The princess listened carefully, integrating their lessons into her leadership. Her people had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable, but they still needed guidance to face the next wave of enemy aggression. The following day, intelligence reports revealed that the enemy had amassed a massive fleet near a nearby system, intending to launch a decisive strike that could destroy her fleet and cripple her homeworld. The princess studied the data carefully, her mind racing through possible strategies. She realized that victory would not come from brute force alone. It required ingenuity, timing, and the ability to exploit every weakness in the enemy's formation. She turned to the human commanders for advice, valuing their experience and insight. Humans suggested a multi-layered strategy. First, smaller squads would engage the enemy at multiple points, creating confusion and dividing their forces. Next, ambushes would target supply lines and command vessels, disrupting coordination. Finally, the princess, flagship, and elite strike teams would deliver decisive blows where the enemy was most vulnerable. Every element relied on timing, communication, and precise execution. It was a plan that required absolute trust and unity among her crews. Preparation consumed the fleet for days. Every officer, pilot, and crew member understood their role. Engineers reinforced hulls, recalibrated weapons, and ensured that every system functioned flawlessly. Civilians were evacuated from vulnerable locations, guided by the humans' experience in logistics and evacuation protocols. The princess moved among them, speaking quietly, encouraging them, and instilling confidence. Her presence inspired more than courage. It reinforced discipline, focus, and belief in their shared purpose. When the day of the decisive engagement arrived, the enemy moved with overconfidence, unaware of the traps laid before them. The smaller squadrons struck first, drawing attention and splitting their formation. Missile volleys, energy strikes, and ambushes from hidden positions inflicted significant damage. The enemy faltered, unable to respond effectively to threats from multiple directions. The princess watched closely, coordinating with her officers and the humans to adjust tactics in real time. As the battle intensified, she led a critical maneuver herself, piloting a squadron to intercept an enemy command vessel. Her presence on the front line inspired her crews to act with courage and precision. The humans provided strategic oversight, calculating trajectories, timing attacks, and ensuring that every action maximized impact. The enemy's confidence crumbled further as their command structure weakened, their fleets scattered, and communication lines were severed. Hours passed in relentless combat. Explosions lit the void, beams of energy tore through enemy hulls, and debris floated silently in the darkness. The princess fleet, though smaller, fought with unmatched determination, exploiting every mistake and turning the enemy's numerical advantage into a liability. Civilians watched from safe stations as the battle unfolded, their hope rekindled by the resilience and ingenuity of their defenders. Finally, the enemy's fleet began to retreat, battered and disorganized. Commanders faced with overwhelming losses and unexpected resistance realized that victory was impossible. The princess people had survived, guided by humans who refused to bow, who acted with intelligence, strategy, and patience. The homeworld remained secure, the fleets intact, and the enemy demoralized. The princess allowed herself a moment to breathe, recognizing that the impossible had been achieved. They had turned the tide of the war, not through overwhelming power, but through endurance, courage, and ingenuity. In the aftermath, the princess convened with her advisors and the human commanders to plan the next steps. They discussed rebuilding, fortifying, and preparing for potential future threats. The humans emphasized that survival required constant vigilance, continuous learning, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The princess agreed, understanding that victory was not a single moment but an ongoing process of resilience and strategic action. Her people, once demoralized and broken, now moved with confidence and purpose. Soldiers trained with renewed vigor, engineers repaired and enhanced ships and infrastructure, and civilians contributed to the war effort with determination and hope. The humans remained present, offering guidance, sharing knowledge, and demonstrating that survival was a product of courage combined with intelligence. The princess walked through the restored city, observing the signs of recovery. Buildings were repaired, communication networks restored, and essential services re-established. Children played cautiously in the streets, their laughter a reminder of what had been preserved. Elders spoke of hope and resilience, inspired by the example set by the fleet and the humans who had guided them. The princess felt a deep satisfaction, not from power, but from witnessing her people reclaim their strength, dignity, and future. She reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had stepped forward when all seemed lost, reaching out to a species long thought distant and unpredictable. She had forged an alliance based on trust, strategy, and shared purpose. Together, they had defied the expectations of the enemy, endured overwhelming odds, and created a path towards survival and renewal. Humanity had shown her people the power of endurance, adaptability, and calculated courage. In the quiet of the observation deck, the princess gazed at the stars. She understood that the war was far from over, but she no longer felt fear. She felt confidence, not born of arrogance, but of experience, strategy, and the knowledge that her people could endure, adapt, and survive. The humans had taught them that defiance was not reckless. It was a deliberate choice, grounded in intelligence, courage, and resilience. The princess addressed her fleet. Her voice was calm, firm, and inspiring. "We have faced the storm and endured. We have learned from those who never bow, and we have proven that courage and strategy together can defy fate. This war is not yet over, but we have shown that we are not powerless. We are alive, we are strong, and we will continue to fight for our people, our homes, and our future." Her words were met with quiet determination. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike felt a renewed sense of purpose. The humans, observing from nearby ships, nodded in acknowledgement, their presence a reminder that even the most unexpected allies could shape history. The alliance had proven itself in combat, in strategy, and in endurance. It was a testament to the power of resilience and the refusal to surrender to despair. In the following months, the princess worked tirelessly to rebuild her homeworld and strengthen her fleets. Trade routes were re-established, defenses enhanced, and communities restored. Her people, guided by the lessons of humanity, learned to balance courage with strategy, strength with intelligence, and determination with patience. The enemy remained a threat, but their power had been broken, their confidence shaken, and their ability to dominate her people diminished. The galaxy began to take notice. Stories spread of the alien princess who had refused to surrender, of the humans who had guided her people, and of the fleet that had endured impossible odds. The legend of their defiance inspired other worlds, reminding them that even in despair, courage, intelligence, and perseverance could create miracles. The princess reflected on the journey she had undertaken. She had faced fear, despair, and overwhelming odds. She had reached out to the unknown and found allies when hope seemed impossible. She had led her people through darkness and emerged into a light that was not granted by fate, but earned through action, courage, and strategy. Humanity had shown her what it meant to endure, to adapt, and to defy expectations. In the quiet of the night, as the twin suns set over her homeworld, the princess felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not only survived, but had taught her people a lesson that would endure for generations, that hope, courage, and intelligence together could change the course of destiny. The war was far from over, but her people had been reborn. They were no longer victims of circumstance. They were survivors, strategists, and warriors capable of shaping their own fate. The princess gazed at the stars, feeling a quiet determination. She understood that challenges would continue to arise, that enemies would seek to destroy what she had fought to preserve. But she also understood that her people, guided by courage and wisdom, and strengthened by alliances forged in adversity, could meet any challenge. Humanity had taught them endurance, and they had embraced it fully. And in that moment, she knew that the galaxy would remember this story, not for the destruction it had caused, but for the defiance, courage, and unity that had saved an entire people. They had faced impossible odds, acted when others would have surrendered, and shown that even in a losing war, hope, strategy, and courage could create victory. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, reflecting the resilience of those who refused to bow. The princess, standing among her people and allies, knew that this was not the end but a new beginning. Together, they had rewritten the narrative of their lives. Together, they had defied fate. In a losing war, the alien princess stepped forward and defied fate.